Caleb has a new habit. Every morning before coffee and before email, he checks his future, not in a crystal ball, on a tiny screen. He opens his investing account. He looks at the number. He blinks. $243.17. Yesterday it was $242.91. Caleb stares at the screen like it personally betrayed him. 26 cents. That is the big financial future. That is the famous power of compounding. Caleb refreshes the page. The number does not apologize. He refreshes again. Still no fireworks, just $243.17, and one tired beginner wondering if he is doing it wrong. Then the desk makes a sound. Not a normal desk sound. A suspicious little click. Caleb looks down. A tiny trapdoor opens between his notebook and his half-finished coffee. Future Caleb climbs out holding a little construction helmet. Caleb says, "Please tell me the money is under the floor." Future Caleb says, "Kind of." Caleb looks back at the screen. "I thought if I started investing, I would feel progress." Future Caleb nods. "You did start. Then why does it feel like watching paint dry in slow motion?" Future Caleb smiles. "Because you just met the flat part." And that is the problem we are solving today. Why does the first $100,000 feel so slow? Why does the beginning feel boring and tiny, even when the idea is supposed to be powerful? The answer is not that compounding is fake. The answer is not that Caleb is bad at money. The answer is that the first part of wealth building is not the fireworks part. It is the machine building part. And machines do not look impressive while the screws are still on the floor. Before we go further, this is beginner education, not financial advice. I am not your financial advisor. Investing has risk. Returns are not guaranteed. You can lose money. Money you need soon should not be invested. And before investing, you need basic safety like emergency savings and a plan you actually understand. This story is not a promise. It is a map. So if your number is still small, this episode is not here to shame you. It is here to show you what the quiet stage is actually doing. Future Caleb points at the trap door. "Come downstairs." Caleb looks at the dark opening. "Is this where the 26 cents lives?" "Yes," Future Caleb says, and it is exhausted. They climb down. Under Caleb's desk is not a treasure room. It is a tiny factory about the size of a shoebox. Inside the factory, 3 little workers are trying to build Caleb's future. Contribution, time, and return. Contribution is sweating with a pile of bricks. Time is holding a calendar and moving with offensive calm. Return is tiny, holding a wrench and waving politely. Caleb looks at the tiny worker. "That is it?" Future Caleb says, "At the beginning, yes." This is the first reason the first 100,000 feels slow. At the beginning, your money is not doing most of the work. You are. If Caleb has a small balance, even a decent percentage return creates a small number of dollars. That does not mean the percentage is useless. It means the base is still small. Future Caleb pulls down a chart. On the left side is $1,000. On the right side is $100,000. Above both numbers, Future Caleb writes the same pretend return, 7%. On $1,000, 7% is $70 in a year, before fees, taxes, inflation, and all the messy real-life stuff. $70 is not nothing, but it does not feel like a life-changing machine. It feels like finding money in an old jacket. Now, Future Caleb points to $100,000. 7% of $100,000 is $7,000. Same percentage, different base. Much louder dollar amount. Caleb squints at the chart. So the return is not weak, it is just quiet because the balance is small. Exactly, Future Caleb says. Your money has a volume knob, the balance is the knob. This is why the first 100,000 can feel so frustrating. You hear people talk about compounding like it is a rocket, but early on it feels more like pushing a heavy shopping cart across a parking lot with one squeaky wheel. Every month you push, every month the number moves. But most of the movement is still coming from your hands, not from the engine. Caleb looks back at the factory. Contribution carries another brick. Return taps it with a tiny wrench. Time adds a sticker that says, "Keep going." Caleb says, "So I am the engine?" Future Caleb shakes his head. At first, you are the starter motor. That sounds less heroic. It is less heroic. It is more useful. Then the factory wall opens. Behind it is a long trail. At the beginning of the trail is a sign, the boring valley. Caleb immediately tries to leave. Future Caleb blocks the exit. Everyone wants to skip this part, he says. The trail has markers, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 25,000, 50,000, 75,000. Far away at the top of a hill is a door marked 100,000. Caleb looks at the distance. That door is rude. Future Caleb says, it is not rude, it is honest. The first 100,000 feels slow because your brain compares a seed to a tree. It looks at a small beginning and demands a big ending. It wants proof now. It wants the graph to bend today. It wants the future to stop being invisible. But most of the first stage happens underground. You are not just growing a number. You are building habits, learning what you own, separating long-term money from money needed soon, and practicing how not to panic when the line gets ugly. And boring is where many people quit. Caleb and future Caleb start walking. At the 1,000 marker, Caleb finds a tiny sprout. He kneels beside it. This is adorable. The sprout trembles in the wind. A red cloud floats over it. The number on Caleb's screen drops a little. Caleb jumps back. It went down. I thought we were walking toward 100,000. Future Caleb opens an umbrella. We are, but the path is not a straight sidewalk. This is the next important part. Investing returns do not arrive like a paycheck. They do not show up on the same day every month, wearing a uniform, carrying a clipboard, and saying, hello, here is your smooth 7%. Markets move up and down. Sometimes a good long-term plan still has bad weeks, bad months, or bad years. That is why money needed soon should not be walking in this storm. Rent money, food money, bills, and known near-term needs belong behind the emergency shield. That money has a different job. Caleb looks at the sprout. So it is slow and it can also go backward. Sometimes, future Caleb says, that is honest education. They keep walking. At the 5,000 marker, the sprout has a small fence. At 10,000, it has a second leaf. At 25,000, Caleb can finally see a little garden. Not a forest, not a mansion, a garden. Future Caleb points to the ground. Notice what changed. Caleb looks around. It still feels slow. Yes, but now there are more pieces working. At first, Caleb's monthly contributions were almost the whole story. But as the balance grows, the returns have more surface area to work on. The same percentage can touch more dollars. That does not make it guaranteed. It makes the math more visible. Future Caleb draws a wheel in the dirt. The wheel has 3 parts: contribution, time, and return. When the wheel is tiny, Caleb has to push hard. When the wheel gets bigger, it still needs pushing, but it begins to carry more of its own momentum. This is why people talk about the first 100,000 as a milestone. Not because 100,000 is magic, not because life suddenly becomes easy, not because the market starts obeying you. It does not. 100,000 is useful because the balance is large enough that percentage changes become more noticeable. 1% of $1,000 is $10. 1% of $100,000 is $1,000. Same 1%. Different emotional experience. Caleb looks offended. So math has been whispering because I was poor? Future Caleb pauses. Math has been whispering because the pile was small. That is the same thing, but nicer. Nicer matters. Then the trail passes a carnival. The sign says, Comparison Fair. Caleb hears cheering. A giant balloon floats over the crowd with a huge number on it. Someone is yelling about making more in a month than Caleb has saved in his entire life. One booth shows a perfect chart that only goes up. Another sells secret shortcuts. Another has a rocket with no seatbelts. Caleb slows down. Maybe I am behind. Future Caleb does not answer right away. He points behind the booths. Behind the giant number balloon are hidden labels. Starting balance unknown. Risk unknown. Debt unknown. Income unknown. Time invested unknown. Luck unknown. Context missing. Future Caleb says, comparison makes the first 100,000 feel even slower because it removes the timeline. Caleb looks at his small garden. So I am comparing my chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 20? Sometimes, future Caleb says, and sometimes you are comparing your real life to someone else's advertisement. The comparison fair gets louder. Caleb almost steps inside. Then his tiny contribution worker runs up carrying another brick. The worker drops it at Caleb's feet. It is not glamorous. It is useful. Caleb picks it up. They leave the carnival. The trail turns into a garage. Inside the garage is a half-built machine. It is not beautiful. It has wires, a small engine, a dashboard, and one suspicious cup holder. Future Caleb writes 5 words on the wall: protect, feed, place, ignore, measure. This, he says, is the 100K machine. Caleb looks disappointed. I was hoping the machine would be cooler. It gets cooler when it works. The first part is protect. That means the emergency shield comes before the market storm. If every surprise bill forces Caleb to sell investments at a bad time, the machine keeps breaking. Safety helps growth survive. The second part is feed. That means a contribution Caleb can actually repeat, not the biggest number he can imagine on a motivated Sunday night, the number he can still do when work is annoying and the month refuses to behave. Consistency beats a dramatic plan that collapses. The third part is place. Long-term money needs a long-term place. Caleb understands, such as learning about broad diversified funds, retirement accounts, and low-cost options. It does not mean chasing random tips or putting rent money in the storm. The fourth part is ignore, not ignore your money forever. Ignore the wrong scoreboard. If Caleb checks the balance 5 times a day, the line starts controlling his emotions. Early on, the better scoreboard is behavior. Did I add what I planned? Did I avoid money-needed soon mistakes? Did I stay calm when the line moved? The fifth part is measure, not just today's balance. Measure dollars added, months consistent, fees understood, risk understood, and money kept safe. Caleb looks at the 5 words. Less exciting than a shortcut, he says, and less likely to explode, future Caleb says. Then future Caleb opens the dashboard. He shows Caleb a simple hypothetical example, not a promise, not a prediction, just a way to see why the beginning feels slow. If someone put away $200 a month with 0 growth, reaching $100,000 would take a little over 41 years. If that same $200 a month earned a hypothetical 7% annual return, compounded monthly, the path could be closer to 20 years. Again, not guaranteed. Real markets are not smooth. Fees, taxes, inflation, timing, and losses matter, but the example shows the shape. At first, the monthly dollars do most of the work. Later, the balance starts helping more. If the monthly amount is higher, the timeline can change. If returns are lower, the timeline can change. If someone stops, withdraws, panics, or invests money they needed soon, the timeline can change. The point is not the exact date. The point is the shape. Caleb studies the dashboard. So the lever I control most is building a repeatable machine and not getting tricked by boredom, future Caleb says. The garage door opens. Outside is the hill with the 100,000 door. Caleb walks toward it. The garden is bigger now. The factory is louder. Time is still slow, but the machine has a hum. At the door, Caleb expects a treasure room. Future Caleb hands him the key. Caleb opens it. Inside is not a yacht, not a pile of gold, not a magical button that says, never worry again. Inside is a bigger engine. Caleb looks confused. That's it? Future Caleb says that is a lot. The first 100,000 is not the end. It is the point where the engine has more weight. The dollars are still at risk. The market can still fall. Life can still happen. You still need judgment and patience, but the machine is no longer a shoebox under a desk. It is something you can hear. That is why the first 100,000 feels so slow. Because in the beginning, the most important progress is not always visible. It is the habit, the safety, the learning, the boring repeat, and the choice not to quit just because the line is quiet. Caleb looks at the engine, the path behind him, and his tiny worker holding another brick. He finally smiles. So the flat part was not failure. Future Caleb says, no, it was foundation. Caleb looks back at his phone. $243.17, same number, different meaning. It is not impressive yet. But it is not nothing. It is a brick, and a brick is exactly what a machine needs at the beginning. So here is Caleb's challenge. Not for everyone, not as financial advice, just as a beginner thinking exercise. Choose one boring number you can repeat for 90 days. It might be saving, debt payoff, learning before investing, or building the emergency shield. Then choose one scoreboard that is not daily market movement, months consistent, dollars protected, fees understood, risk understood, one step repeated, because the first 100,000 is not won by staring harder at the screen. It is built by making the invisible work visible enough that you do not quit. And next time, Caleb is going to learn the part nobody likes. What happens when he finally starts feeling confident and then the market turns red.